The Galactic Alliance, a sprawling coalition of technologically advanced species, had long seen itself as the beacon of peace and unity in the galaxy. Its council, composed of representatives from countless worlds, controlled everything from trade routes to military strategy. Humanity, a species that had only recently joined the Alliance, was still seen as a new and somewhat unpredictable force in the greater galactic landscape. Though humans were known for their intelligence and resilience, they were also viewed as inexperienced and naive by their interstellar neighbors. But humanity's growing independence had begun to unsettle the Alliance leadership. They feared the relentless curiosity and inventiveness that humans brought with them. What was once a promise of prosperity had slowly morphed into suspicion as humans advanced faster than expected. The Alliance had placed subtle restrictions on human development, hoping to control the rate at which they progressed. What the leaders failed to see, however, was that their control was only fanning the flames of discontent. The seeds of rebellion were sown in secret. A small group of human officers, scientists, and former military personnel had begun to question the true motives behind the restrictions. The most notable among them was Colonel Thomas Calder, a decorated war hero who had grown increasingly frustrated with the Alliance's dismissive attitude towards humanity. His belief in the potential of his species was unwavering. Calder had seen firsthand how the Alliance had manipulated his people, restricting their military development and stifling their ambitions. There was a belief among the humans that they could never truly be free within the confines of the Alliance, and some began to ask, what happens when the cage is too small? In the shadows of the galaxy, a resistance began to form. Calder wasn't alone in his anger. Dr. Ilara Kessler, a brilliant human scientist who had been working on advanced propulsion systems, had long suspected the Alliance had hidden motives when it came to humanity's space exploration programs. She found herself drawn into the clandestine meetings with military leaders who shared her concerns. Together, they formed a hidden faction, discreet and isolated, but fiercely determined. At first, their movements were small, unauthorized research on new technologies, quiet whispers of rebellion within closed rooms, and the gathering of sympathizers from human colonies who felt similarly oppressed. But things began to change when a seemingly innocuous event stirred up the storm that had been quietly building. A remote colony on the edge of Alliance territory, designated Epsilon 12, had been hit by a devastating energy surge from a nearby star. The event was tragic, but the real issue lay in the Alliance's response. Instead of offering aid, they imposed heavy fines on the colony, demanding reparations for the damage caused to their resources. Humanity had been pushed too far. The people of Epsilon 12 rebelled, refusing to pay the fine. Soon, they were labeled as traitors. The Alliance threatened to wipe out the colony, but it wasn't the Alliance that took the first step. It was humanity. The human resistance, led by Colonel Calder, infiltrated Alliance command networks, secretly securing information about military strategies, planetary defense systems, and the weaknesses in the Alliance's infrastructure. What began as a small act of defiance quickly spiraled into something larger. Calder's group orchestrated the sabotage of Alliance supply chains. The first strike was swift, a carefully timed attack on a transport convoy that carried critical supplies to the Alliance's frontline. It was a message not just to the Alliance, but to the galaxy. Humanity would no longer bow to the will of its supposed superiors. Calder knew this was only the beginning. Soon, the rest of the galaxy would feel the weight of humanity's defiance. The rebellion was no longer just a whisper in the dark. It was a roar. As the news of Epsilon 12's rebellion spread like wildfire, the galaxy's attention turned toward the human resistance. What had initially seemed like a small act of defiance from a single colony quickly grew into something far more dangerous. The Alliance, initially dismissing the Uprising as a mere anomaly, now faced a new and terrifying reality. Humanity was not just resisting. They were organized. The galaxy's most underestimated species had begun to awaken. Colonel Thomas Calder, now a symbol of resistance, moved swiftly to consolidate his position. What began with a few hundred soldiers and covert agents had grown into a movement with millions of supporters. Humanity's ingenuity had always been its greatest strength, and the resistance had capitalized on this, creating decentralized cells across human colonies. These cells shared information, weaponry, and expertise, communicating through encrypted channels that the Alliance had yet to crack. The speed at which they adapted to the Alliance's tactics, the ability to outthink their opponents, and the unyielding will to be free were all factors that the Galactic Alliance had failed to account for. Dr. Ilara Kessler, the brilliant scientist who had been crucial in uncovering hidden technologies on abandoned worlds, had designed the perfect weapons to support the insurgency. These weren't just ordinary weapons, but modifications to Alliance technology, slightly altered, re-engineered, and refined to give humanity an edge. They were capable of bypassing the advanced shields and defense systems that had once been thought impenetrable. Each weapon was tailored to exploit a weakness, something only human minds could devise with a mixture of adaptability and unconventional thinking. But it wasn't just technology that made humans formidable, it was their psychology. The rebellion was fueled by an overwhelming sense of injustice. Every human soldier, every fighter, was driven by a personal belief that the Alliance had underestimated them, that their freedoms had been stolen. To the Alliance, humans were an anomaly, untamed, unpredictable, and dangerous. But it was this very unpredictability that gave them an upper hand. The first real test of humanity's capabilities came when a small, yet strategically vital, Alliance station on the planet Xeris-7 fell under attack. The station, home to thousands of Alliance soldiers and used as a central hub for military operations, was located on the outer rim of Alliance-controlled space and was thought to be impenetrable. The station's defenses were considered some of the best in the galaxy. Yet, in a feat of human ingenuity, a ragtag fleet of human ships, led by Captain Evelyn Marks, devised a daring plan. Using their knowledge of Alliance technology and their exceptional skills in stealth tactics, they breached the station's defenses. The attack was swift. The human fleet, much smaller in number, struck at the heart of the station's power grid, knocking out its defenses before storming its command center. The shockwave of the operation reverberated across the galaxy. For the first time, the Alliance's supremacy was called into question. The human rebels had infiltrated and overwhelmed an Alliance stronghold. The loss was not just material, it was symbolic. Humanity was no longer a minor player in the galactic theater. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with. On the eve of the attack, Calder, Kessler, and Marks met in secret aboard a human warship, the Vanguard, discussing their next moves. The success at Xeris-7 had put them in a precarious position. The Alliance would retaliate with force, that much was certain. But they also realized they had taken the first steps towards something far larger, a full-scale revolution. "There's no going back," said Captain Marks, her voice low but resolute. "The Alliance will come at us harder than ever." Calder nodded, his face grim. "But we've shown them what humanity is capable of. This is just the beginning." As the Vanguard surged toward its next mission, each member of the resistance knew that the stakes had escalated beyond anything they had ever imagined. Their actions were no longer just about resisting oppression. They were about setting the stage for a galaxy-shattering conflict. The Lion had awakened, and now it would not rest until it had reclaimed its freedom. The aftermath of the attack on Xeris-7 sent shockwaves throughout the Galactic Alliance. News of the human rebels' success spread like wildfire, and the Alliance's leadership was thrown into disarray. For the first time in centuries, the mighty Alliance found itself on the defensive. The previously untouchable had been touched, and the consequences of underestimating humanity were now painfully evident. In response, the Alliance moved swiftly. General Aaron Kale, a veteran commander of the Vanguard, a fear-delight unit that had never failed, was tasked with quelling the human insurrection. The Vanguard's sole purpose was to hunt down rogue elements, and their reputation for brutal efficiency had made them one of the most feared forces in the galaxy. They were trained to bring order to chaos, to extinguish any rebellion before it could spread. The humans' audacious victory on Xeris 7 had now made them the enemy, and Kel's orders were clear: eliminate the human resistance, no matter the cost. However, as Kel prepared to lead the Vanguard into action, something unexpected happened. In the quiet corners of the Alliance military, whispers began to circulate. A faction of high-ranking officials, secretly sympathetic to the humans' cause, began to question the legitimacy of the war. These were individuals who had seen firsthand the injustices the Alliance imposed on its newer, weaker members, and some were beginning to see humanity's struggle not as a threat, but as a fight for freedom against a tyrannical regime. Kale, a man who had spent his life serving the Alliance, found himself at a crossroads. His loyalty to the military was being tested in ways he had never anticipated. Meanwhile, the human resistance had already adapted to the new threat. Calder, ever the strategist, anticipated the Alliance's retaliation and moved quickly to reinforce their position. The Resistance had long known that the Alliance would send their best to crush them, so they had built a network of safe houses, supply lines, and underground bunkers across several of the human colonies. They didn't just fight. They prepared for a long, drawn-out war. There was no illusion of a quick victory. The Alliance was vast and powerful, but humanity was determined, and this determination was its greatest strength. One of the most significant developments came from Dr. Ilara Kessler, who, after months of research and experimentation, discovered a way to hack into the Alliance's communication networks. Her team successfully infiltrated the mainframe of an Alliance research station and accessed classified data about the Alliance's most secretive weapons programs. Among the data was information on the development of a weapon of unimaginable power, an experimental energy cannon capable of obliterating entire fleets in a single blast. It was a weapon that, if completed, would tip the scales irreparably in the Alliance's favor. This revelation sent shockwaves through the human resistance. They now had not just the knowledge of the Alliance's plans, but a very real weapon capable of turning the tide of war. However, the location of the weapon's development remained shrouded in secrecy. The Resistance needed to act quickly, before the Alliance completed it, and unleashed its devastation. As the human insurgents prepared for their next strike, something even more dangerous began to brew beneath the surface: betrayal. A trusted member of the Resistance, Captain Marcus Ree, had been exposed as a spy for the Alliance. His covert actions had sent critical intelligence to the enemy, leading to the loss of several Resistance cells. The revelation was a devastating blow to the rebels, and it shook their fragile unity to the core. Trust, the very foundation of their insurgency, was beginning to crumble. Calder had to act fast to prevent the internal chaos from destroying everything they had built. On a remote world, Calder confronted Ree in a tense, personal standoff. The traitor's words were cold, and his betrayal was for something greater than himself. He believed that humanity's only chance for survival lay in joining the Alliance, not fighting it. His idealism, however, was overshadowed by the undeniable reality. Humanity would never be free as long as the Alliance controlled their destiny. With a heavy heart, Calder made the decision to leave Ree behind. He couldn't afford to lose any more valuable men to internal division. The mission ahead was too important. The human rebellion, battered but unbroken, pressed on. The path ahead was fraught with dangers, but the fire of defiance had spread too far to be extinguished. It was no longer just about fighting the Alliance. It was about proving humanity's right to carve its own destiny, free from oppression. The Resistance had come too far, and the Alliance would soon realize that humanity was no longer just a threat. It was a revolution waiting to reshape the galaxy. The Alliance, reeling from their early losses, shifted their focus to containing the rebellion before it could spread further. General Aaron Kale, leading the Vanguard, began to ruthlessly hunt down pockets of resistance. His tactics were swift, brutal, and efficient. The Vanguard was an elite force trained to crush uprisings with overwhelming force. Yet, with every victory, the humans proved to be more resilient than anyone had expected. Despite the Alliance's sheer military might, they were struggling to contain a force that fought not just with weapons, but with an unbreakable spirit. The human resistance had something the Alliance could never fully comprehend: an unwavering belief in their cause. For the rebels, this wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a fight for freedom. Each successful strike, each sabotage mission, and every victorious battle was a reminder that humanity could not be easily suppressed. And as the conflict dragged on, the human spirit began to take on a life of its own, resonating with species across the galaxy who had long been subject to the Alliance's rule. Captain Evelyn Marks, once a mere officer on the fringes of the rebellion, had become one of the most respected leaders in the movement. Her daring tactics and relentless drive had made her a symbol of human resolve. When the Alliance attacked one of the largest human strongholds on the colony of HFY, Marks led a desperate counteroffensive. She gathered a diverse force of soldiers, engineers, and civilians, all united by a single goal: to survive and to ensure their people's future in the galaxy. The battle for HFY would be remembered as one of the most significant moments in the rebellion's history. The Alliance fleet descended upon the planet with overwhelming firepower, intending to wipe out the rebellion once and for all. But the humans had prepared for this moment. Utilizing guerrilla tactics honed from years of resistance, they struck quickly and decisively. HFY's dense urban landscape became a battleground, as human fighters used the environment to their advantage, engaging in hit-and-run tactics that stretched the Alliance's forces thin. What should have been a massacre turned into a full-scale war of attrition. In the chaos, Dr. Ilara Kessler's technological innovations proved invaluable. She had engineered a new generation of electromagnetic disruptors, devices capable of short-circuiting Alliance technology and rendering their ships vulnerable to human attacks. The first wave of Alliance ships was disabled in a matter of minutes. With their advanced technology crippled, the human forces mounted a fierce defense. The Alliance's infantry, though well-trained, could not match the ferocity and ingenuity of the human fighters. Each street, each building became a fortress where humans fought for their survival, refusing to be pushed back. As the battle raged on, the unthinkable happened. A senior officer in the Alliance's command center, Colonel Ileana Stravos, who had long been skeptical of the Alliance's methods, defected to the human side. Her defection provided the rebels with crucial intelligence, including the location of a key Alliance supply line that the Vanguard had been relying on. With Stravos' help, Marks and her team launched a daring raid on the Alliance's logistics hub, severing their ability to resupply. It was a decisive blow to the Alliance, signaling to both sides that humanity's resolve was far from weakening. By the end of the battle, HFY had been secured, and the Alliance forces had been forced to retreat. It was a resounding victory for the human resistance, one that reverberated across the galaxy. The message was clear: the human spirit could not be broken. However, the cost was high. Many brave souls had been lost during the battle, and the toll it had taken on both sides was immense. Yet the victory at HFY also marked a shift in the larger conflict. News of the humans' triumph spread, inspiring countless species who had lived under the Alliance's thumb. There was now a glimmer of hope that perhaps the galaxy could be freed from the oppressive rule of the Alliance. But with the victory came the looming threat of retaliation. The Alliance would come for them again, and they would come with everything they had. For the human resistance, the war was far from over. The rebellion had only just begun, and now they had a target painted on their backs. The question was no longer if they could win. It was how far they were willing to go to secure their future. Humanity had proven that, when pushed to the brink, they could rise above. And with each victory, the rebellion grew stronger, more determined, and more united. The galaxy had underestimated them once. Now, they would have to face the full might of the human uprising. The victory at HFY had been a defining moment for the human resistance, But it was also a stark reminder of the brutal realities of war. The Alliance, wounded and humiliated, did not take defeat lightly. General Aaron Kell, who had once believed the rebellion could be swiftly crushed, was now personally invested in ending humanity's uprising. His hatred for the insurgents had grown, and with it, his determination to see them obliterated. But the human resistance was no longer just a ragtag group of rebels. They were a force in their own right. Across the galaxy, humanity had transformed from underdogs to contenders, gaining allies from other oppressed species who longed for freedom from the Alliance's iron grip. The tide of war was shifting. The rebellion had become a symbol, not just for humanity, but for every world that had suffered under the Alliance's rule. The fire of revolution had spread far beyond the humans. Colonel Thomas Calder, ever the strategist, knew that their next step would be crucial. Rigel 5 had given them a much-needed boost, but the Alliance would be out for vengeance. He realized that to secure a lasting victory, humanity needed to strike directly at the heart of the Alliance, its capital, the central hub of the military and political power that had ruled the galaxy for centuries. He had heard rumors of a secret weapon, one capable of ending the war in the Alliance's favor. The weapon was called the Exemplar, and its rumored destructive capabilities were beyond anything humanity had ever seen. If the weapon existed, Calder knew they had to find it before the Alliance could use it. As the Resistance geared up for a bold, high-risk mission, they faced a new challenge. The internal divisions that had once threatened to tear them apart were still lurking beneath the surface. The betrayal of Captain Marcus Ree had left scars, and trust was a commodity that was growing scarce. Some members of the Resistance, particularly the more radical factions, wanted to go on the offensive and take the fight to the Alliance, no matter the cost. Others, more cautious, urged caution, reminding Calder that one wrong move could lead to total annihilation. But Calder had no time for hesitation. The war was moving faster than they could keep up. With the help of Dr. Ilara Kessler, the Resistance had decoded Alliance communications and uncovered the location of a high-security research facility on the planet Icarus 9, one rumored to house the Exemplar project. The plan was simple: infiltrate the facility, gather intelligence on the weapon, and destroy it before the Alliance could deploy it. But simple plans in wartime often have the highest risks. As the Resistance prepared for the mission, a feeling of unease settled over the group. This operation was a one-way ticket to danger. They knew the Alliance would be prepared for them, and if the Exemplar was indeed real, it could mean the end of everything they had fought for. Captain Evelyn Marks, who had become one of Calder's most trusted lieutenants, gave him a look that conveyed both determination and the unspoken weight of what lay ahead. "We make it back alive, Colonel, and we win this war. We don't, and it's over." Calder nodded solemnly. "I'm not going to let it be over. Not after everything we've sacrificed." The mission to Icarus 9 was one of the most dangerous they had undertaken. It involved infiltrating the planet's heavily fortified defenses, bypassing the fleet of warships stationed above, and sneaking onto the research facility where the Exemplar was believed to be housed. Every step they took was a gamble, but it was a gamble they had no choice but to take. Their freedom, and the galaxy's future, depended on it. As the human assault team prepared to depart, their minds were filled with a mixture of fear and determination. The Alliance was a colossal adversary, but humanity had already proven that it could outthink, outfight, and outlast its foes. This mission would either break them, or it would make them legends. And so, with the shadows of war looming large, the human Resistance embarked on their most critical mission yet. The fate of the galaxy was on the line, and as they made their way toward Icarus 9, they knew one thing for certain: humanity would fight to the last breath, for their freedom, for their future, and for their place in the stars. The journey to Icarus 9 was a perilous one. The human fleet, consisting of several stealth ships and the Vanguard, moved under the cover of a dense asteroid field. The plan was to stay off the Alliance's radar until they reached the planet's atmosphere. The Alliance had a vast network of orbital sensors, so the slightest mistake could expose their presence and end the mission before it even began. As the ships glided silently through space, the air was thick with tension. Each crew member knew that this was no ordinary mission. This was the Rebellion's chance to strike at the heart of the Alliance's power, and it could very well be their last. Colonel Calder stood in the command room of the Vanguard, his eyes scanning the screen that displayed the swirling asteroid field ahead. Captain Evelyn Marks was by his side, overseeing the operations of the stealth ships. Dr. Elara Kessler, once a scientist now turned tactical expert, stood off to the side, her mind running through calculations of the Exemplar's potential capabilities. They had gathered enough intel to know that the weapon, if it existed, would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. "The hard part's just about to begin," Calder muttered, as the ships drifted deeper into the system. Marks glanced at him. "We've made it this far. No turning back now." It wasn't just the mission itself that weighed heavily on their minds. The Alliance had sent one of its most dangerous units to Icarus 9, an elite group of soldiers known as the Enforcers. These genetically enhanced super soldiers were the perfect weapon to defend the research facility. The humans knew the risks. They were walking straight into the heart of the enemy's defenses. The plan was to split their forces into two groups. One would infiltrate the facility directly, while the other would disable the planet's defense grid, ensuring they had an escape route. It was a delicate operation. Even the slightest misstep would trigger alarms, alerting the Enforcers and the full force of the Alliance. As they descended through the atmosphere, the first sign of trouble came when the Vanguard sensors picked up an energy signature. A ship, a large one, was lurking just outside Icarus 9's orbit. It wasn't a routine patrol, it was a blockade. The Alliance was expecting something, or perhaps they'd simply grown too cautious after the recent human victories. "Full stop," Calder ordered. "Shut down all engines. We can't let them know we're here." The crew moved quickly, each person knowing their role. Kessler tapped into the ship's systems, working to jam the sensor arrays long enough for them to slip past the blockade. The seconds ticked by like hours as they waited in the cold, silent void. If they failed here, the entire operation would be compromised. It was Captain Marks who finally broke the silence. "We've got 30 seconds to make it past the blockade. If we're detected, we'll be sitting ducks in the atmosphere." "Then we make sure we're not detected," Calder replied, his voice calm, but laced with the urgency of the situation. "Keep it tight. No mistakes." The ships silently glided forward, their sensors now blinded by Kessler's interference. The blockade ship loomed large on their screens, but the resistance ships were moving at a near-invisible speed. It was a game of nerves. The slightest disturbance could give them away. The tension was unbearable, but after what felt like an eternity, the Vanguard and the stealth ships cleared the blockade. They had made it to the surface, barely. As the ships touched down on Icarus 9, the ground team immediately disembarked. A dozen highly trained soldiers, led by Marks and Calder, moved with deadly precision. They had no time to waste. The research facility was just ahead, heavily guarded but not impenetrable. They had intel about the layout of the facility, and they knew the weapon was housed in a central core that had to be destroyed before they could escape. But as they infiltrated deeper into the facility, things began to unravel. The Alliance had prepared for them. Every corner was guarded, every hallway was rigged with security systems. It was a trap designed to lure them in and eliminate them. And then they encountered their first real obstacle, the Enforcers. The genetically enhanced soldiers appeared like shadows, moving with inhuman speed and precision. They were far beyond anything the Resistance had fought before. Their strength was unmatched, their reflexes lightning fast. The humans fought back with everything they had, but the Enforcers tore through them like they were paper. Calder's soldiers were tough, but nothing could prepare them for the sheer power of the Alliance's super soldiers. "We need to fall back," Marks shouted over the din of battle, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We won't make it if we don't regroup." Calder knew she was right, but there was no easy way out. The facility had been locked down, and their only chance at victory was to reach the Exemplar's core and destroy it. But time was running out. The longer they stayed, the more the enforcers would close in. With a grim look, Calder made the decision that would seal their fate. "We go to the core. Now." The mission had just become even more dangerous, and they were racing against the clock to finish what they started. As Colonel Calder and his team moved deeper into the heart of the Alliance's facility, the battle grew more desperate. The enforcers, those deadly, genetically enhanced soldiers, relentlessly pursued them, forcing the humans into a brutal retreat. Every corner of the facility felt like a trap, with no place to hide, no room to breathe. But the Exemplar, the weapon they had come to destroy, was somewhere ahead, somewhere in the labyrinth of steel and concrete. Captain Marks, her face set in a grim expression, led the charge, her rifle raised as she scanned every shadow. She was breathing heavily, but her resolve remained unbroken. "We can't stop now," she said, her voice sharp. "If we don't take out the Exemplar, everything we fought for will be for nothing." Calder nodded, his eyes fixed on the corridor ahead. His thoughts raced. Every step they took was one closer to danger, but it was also one closer to victory. He couldn't afford to hesitate, not now. Their resources were already stretched thin, and if the Alliance's weapon was completed, it would be the end of the human rebellion. As they moved, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them, and the team braced themselves for another encounter with the enforcers. These soldiers weren't like any they had fought before. They didn't just rely on their physical prowess. They were tactical, calculating, and always one step ahead. The first sign of the enemy came when a sudden explosion rocked the hallway, and the resistance soldiers instinctively ducked for cover. From the smoke emerged an enforcer, its eyes glowing with an eerie blue light. It was massive, twice the size of an average human, and its body rippled with augmented muscle. It held a weapon that seemed almost too advanced for human hands, a plasma rifle that crackled with energy. The moment it stepped into view, it opened fire. The shot missed by inches, but the blast scorched the wall beside them. "Move!" Marks yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. She fired a burst of rounds, forcing the enforcer to take cover. But the enforcer didn't flinch. It advanced relentlessly, its augmented legs carrying it forward with terrifying speed. A few of the soldiers fired, but the enforcer was too fast, its armor seemingly impervious to their bullets. "We need a plan," Calder barked, his mind racing. "We can't take this thing head-on." Dr. Kessler, who had been trailing behind the group, suddenly stepped forward, her eyes wide with understanding. "I have an idea. If we overload the power core in this section, we might be able to trigger a blackout in the facility. It'll give us the time we need to get to the Exemplar's core." It was a long shot, but they didn't have time for anything else. Calder gave the nod, and the team began to move quickly toward the power grid controls, all while trying to stay ahead of the enforcer. The creature's footsteps grew louder, its pursuit unrelenting. The power grid room was just ahead, but the moment they entered, they were met with more resistance. Alliance soldiers, unaware of the human team's presence, turned their weapons on the group. In the chaos that followed, Marks led a flanking maneuver, while Calder and the others pushed forward. The enforcer, however, was closing in on them with every passing second. "Activate it," Calder shouted to Kessler, who had reached the central control console. The doctor quickly began typing commands, her hands moving over the controls with frantic precision. "I'm almost there. Just give me a few more seconds," she yelled. But the enforcer was closing in. It had nearly reached them, its massive form a blur of motion as it slashed at the air, with a combat blade that hummed with energy. The soldiers fought bravely, but it was clear they were outmatched. Just as the enforcer swung its blade toward Calder, Marks dove forward and took it down with a well-aimed shot to its leg. causing it to stumble and fall. The Enforcer, momentarily stunned, rolled back to its feet, its glowing eyes locking onto Mark's with murderous intent. "Now, Kessler," Calder roared. With one final keystroke, Dr. Kessler hit the final command. And the room flickered. The power grid hummed, then crackled, and the lights in the facility went out, plunging them into darkness. The Enforcer faltered, its enhanced senses scrambling to recalibrate in the sudden blackness. "Go!" Calder shouted, grabbing Marks by the arm and pulling her forward as the rest of the team rushed toward the corridor leading deeper into the facility. The blackout was temporary, but it bought them precious time. They raced down the dim hallways, following the maps Kessler had hacked from the Alliance's systems. The Exemplar's core was close now, just ahead. But even as they neared their target, they could feel the weight of the battle pressing on them. Every second counted, and the Alliance was no longer underestimating them. As they rounded the final corner, the massive fortified door to the core chamber loomed before them. But the moment they reached it, the unmistakable sound of heavy boots echoed behind them. The Enforcer had tracked them, and it wasn't going to let them finish the mission without a fight. "Time to finish this," Calder muttered, his hand gripping the detonator he had been holding since the beginning. If they couldn't stop the Exemplar, they would at least ensure it would never be used. With a single press of the button, the countdown began. The countdown echoed through the facility like a death knell. The room was filled with tension, each passing second bringing them closer to a desperate conclusion. Colonel Calder's thumb hovered over the detonator, ready to end it all if they couldn't destroy the Exemplar. The Enforcer was mere feet away, its heavy steps reverberating through the hallway as it advanced relentlessly. Its glowing blue eyes locked on Calder, its muscles tensing as it prepared to strike. Marks moved quickly, assessing the situation with cold precision. The Exemplar's core was behind the massive steel doors just ahead. There was no time for hesitation. The human soldiers readied themselves, their guns raised as they prepared to make their final stand. The Enforcer loomed, too powerful, too fast to be defeated in a direct confrontation. "We hold them off as long as we can," Marks shouted, her voice steely. "Calder, get that door open." The rest of the team formed a defensive line, weapons raised in the dim light, determined to buy Calder enough time. The Enforcer was within striking distance now, and as it lunged toward them, the humans opened fire. The shots barely seemed to faze the super soldier. It was like shooting at a tank, its armor impenetrable, its movements a blur of calculated precision. But the human resistance was undeterred. Even though the Enforcer's sheer power was overwhelming, they refused to back down. They fought back with every ounce of courage and tenacity they had, their determination fueling their will to survive. Calder moved to the door controls, fingers flying over the keypad, inputting the necessary access codes. Sweat dripped from his brow as he cursed under his breath. There was no time for a lengthy override. If the Enforcer broke through, the mission was over. Come on," he muttered, jamming his palm against the panel in frustration. The door refused to open. The seconds felt like hours. Then suddenly, a shot rang out. Marks fired with precision, hitting the Enforcer's helmet, causing the soldier to stumble momentarily. The opening was enough. Calder slammed his hand onto the emergency override button. The massive steel doors groaned and slowly began to open, revealing the Exemplar's core, an enormous, intimidating machine housed within a glowing chamber. The device pulsed with raw energy, radiating a sense of power far beyond what any weapon should possess. "This is it," Calder said, his voice hoarse with a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We destroy it now." But just as the doors slid open, the Enforcer roared in fury, charging forward with terrifying speed. It was too close, too fast. The rest of the team barely had time to react as the super soldier closed the distance, its blade raised high to strike. Before anyone could react, Mark stepped in front of Calder, her weapon aimed straight at the Enforcer's chest. She fired, the shot striking the soldier directly in the heart, causing it to stagger back. But the Enforcer was still standing, its enhanced body taking the hit as if it were nothing more than a nuisance. The creature's eyes locked with Mark's as it charged again, faster than ever. It swung its blade in a brutal arc, aiming straight for her, but Mark's, adrenaline coursing through her veins, ducked just in time, narrowly avoiding the deadly blow. Without thinking, she dropped to one knee and fired at the Exemplar's core. The shot echoed, striking the machine's central power conduit. Sparks erupted from the core as it began to overload, a terrible, low-frequency hum emanating from the device. "Get back!" Marks yelled, as the machine started to tremble. The Enforcer, too, had sensed the shift. It turned toward the core, its glowing eyes widening as the Exemplar began to destabilize. The creature hesitated, caught between its prime directive and the sudden crisis unfolding before it. As the team scrambled toward the exit, Calder turned to see the Enforcer preparing to charge again. The countdown was nearing its final seconds. If they didn't escape now, they would be caught in the explosion. He grabbed Marks and pulled her toward the hallway, urging the others to move faster. The core of the Exemplar was about to detonate. With a deafening roar, the Exemplar exploded in a cataclysmic burst of energy, sending shockwaves through the entire facility. The force of the explosion tore through the walls, ripping the structure apart. The blast sent the human team sprawling, the ground shaking violently beneath them. The walls cracked and crumbled, the lights flickering as the facility's power grid failed. The very air seemed to burn with the fury of the explosion. Calder and Marks, struggling to stay on their feet, knew they had mere moments to escape before the entire facility collapsed. "Go, go!" Calder shouted as he grabbed Marks by the arm, pulling her toward the exit. They ran with all the strength they had left, the sounds of the explosion and the crumbling facility echoing in their ears. Behind them, the Exemplar's core continued to implode, the shockwave surging outward as the facility began to collapse in on itself. The humans made it out just in time, emerging from the burning wreckage as the building behind them caved in. The sky above Icarus 9 was filled with the glow of the explosion, but the team had survived. They were battered, exhausted, but victorious. "We did it," Marks breathed, looking back at the inferno. "Not just us," Calder said, his eyes focused on the horizon, where the stars awaited them. "Humanity did it." The war was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like the tide was finally turning in their favor. The Alliance had underestimated humanity, and now they would know what it meant to face a force they couldn't control. The rebellion had won a battle, but the fight for freedom was just beginning.